Burglary Blues, written by G.K. Parks and Elisa Archer, narrated by Harlow Wilde. 30. Footage from the hardware store supported Jacob Miller's claims. He purchased gardening equipment, some nails, and a few other supplies. Most of those items were found in the shed, but the 6 small flower pots were missing, along with whatever Siegfried decided to plant inside them. He didn't buy seeds or bulbs, I said. The footage didn't show it, and when we spoke to the clerk, she corroborated what we saw. So what in the world could Siegfried have so desperately wanted to plant? Riley examined our copy of the receipt. He sent the kid to pick up plant food, fertilizer, flower pots, gardening tools, lots of gloves, pruning shears, some pieces of wood, a saw, and nails. It reads innocently enough. Do you think that was intentional? Probably. He squinted into the distance. We need to find out what else Big Bill and Siegfried have stashed. He could be hiding whatever valuables that have yet to be pawned inside the planters for safekeeping. Like what? I don't know. I tried to recall the list of items which had been reported stolen, but besides jewelry, nothing else was small enough to conceal in the flower pots. Do you think a gun would fit in there? Not in the pots the clerk showed us, not without the handle or muzzle sticking out of the dirt, and at that point, it wouldn't be safe to fire. It'd probably explode in someone's hand. Riley checked the time. Maybe Jesselyn Belknap can answer some of our questions. Wouldn't the Millers be a better bet? Do you think Jacob or his mom withheld anything during the interrogation? Jacob might have if he thought it'd keep him out of trouble. I was pretty sure Siegfried told him there was a chance the police would show up at the door, and even if he didn't, the kid must have suspected it, but he had been smart enough to keep that to himself for fear of prosecution for attempted premeditated murder of a police officer. All right. Riley leaned against the hood of the car. What do you think we should do? Why are you asking me? He chuckled, shaking his head. You make the call this time, Lex. I wasn't sure I liked this new game he was playing, but arguing would waste valuable time. After considering our options, I said, we should see if anything turned up at Siegfried's apartment first. Riley pointed at me. Nice. Don't patronize. He hopped off the hood and went around to the driver's side. I wasn't, but I'll have to remember there's no winning with you. I wasn't, he winked. I know. I gave him a playful shove. Oh, now you're busting chops? Seemed fair. He reached for the radio requesting information on Siegfried's apartment. It looks like Sarconi may have been right. Lightman grumbled. The place looks like it got cleared out in a hurry. Drawers were dumped out. The closet doors remained open. We can't be sure when it happened, but a few of Siegfried's neighbors heard noises coming from his apartment around the same time we were busting into his cousin's house. I doubt that's a coincidence. What about security footage? Riley asked. I'll check the cameras outside the building. That's the best we can do. But he wasn't supposed to get back inside. That's why we had units sitting on the building. Siegfried knew it, I said. He knows all our plays. I'd like to know how the fuck he got to be so damn smart. Lightman barked something at someone else. We searched his place the moment we got a warrant, but we didn't find anything damning. Someone said something to Lightman, who cursed again. Guess we didn't search that well. He had a false bottom in one of his drawers, and we just found a few loose floorboards in his closet beneath the carpet. Shit, how did we miss this? He yelled at whoever was nearby. Riley gave me a look. I'm glad we weren't assigned to search the apartment. Me too. He waited for Lightman to get back to us on the radio before he requested permission to interview Jesselyn Belknap again. After Lightman agreed, Riley put the radio back in its rightful spot and started the car. Whatever Siegfried retrieved from his apartment must have been whatever he was afraid someone would take. I wish we knew what could be so valuable. Do you think he had a go-bag? We've been working under the assumption Alfred Siegfried would never run. What choice does he have? We've arrested every member of his biker gang and all the former street bishops. He must realize someone's going to roll on him, and it'll only take one before the rest turn on him too. Maybe you're right. Maybe he wants to get out of Dodge. Riley grabbed the radio, making sure every train station, bus depot, and airport knew to be on the lookout. Then he called Lieutenant Peterson to see about setting up roadblocks. Do you think we're too late? I don't know. He has the money John Wolfe paid him for the pawned items, but that's not enough to start over. That's enough to get away, but he wouldn't have access to any other assets. Unless he had money stashed or more stolen merchandise to hawk. Riley reached for the radio again, making sure the pawn shops on our list were still under surveillance. This guy should have been a professional chess player. He's always 3 steps ahead. When we got closer to the safe house, which was a motel by the highway, Riley instructed me to turn off my phone, so I did. Like Preston said, he was a stickler for following protocol, but we kept the radio with us. Too much was going on to run silent for even a few minutes. After executing a few maneuvers to make sure we hadn't been followed, he pulled the unmarked into a self-serve car wash across the street, which appeared to have been out of service for the better part of a decade. He kept his eyes on the mirrors, grabbing my wrist when I reached for the door handle. Silently, I waited for him to let go. "We're clear," he finally said. "Is this paranoia or extreme caution?" "Both." We made our way across the parking lot, keeping our heads on a swivel. A single motorcycle was parked near the motel office. It had Wisconsin plates. We passed the man who'd ridden it here. He had a long gray beard, a beer gut, and a jolly laugh. He took his room key and headed up the steps. Riley and I followed behind, eavesdropping on his phone conversation, which appeared to be with his wife. Apparently, the man was meeting up with some old friends to go to a revival concert for a rock band who'd been big decades before I was born. He let himself into his room and closed the door. Before I could ask, Riley keyed his radio, requesting a check on the bike. When it came back clean, Riley let out a sigh, the tension in his shoulders easing. "We can never be too careful," he said. After going up one more flight of stairs, Riley led me to the room on the other end and knocked on the door. "Jess," he said, "it's Michael." He waved to whoever was in the silver car beneath us, and I realized that was the protection detail. Jessalyn Belknap cracked the door open, leaving the chain on it to see out. Once she realized it was us, she shut the door, unhooked the chain, and opened it wide. "Did you get him? Can I go home?" "Not yet." Riley led the way inside. As soon as I entered behind him, he locked the door. "Siegfried called in a tip to lure us away from his apartment. Any idea what he kept in there?" "I don't know. All I know is he found everything Big Bill had hidden." "What did Big Bill have?" Riley asked. "I told you already. He kept some things from the jobs his crew pulled." "What about cash, fake IDs, or passports? Anything like that?" "I'm sure Big Bill had cash on hand, but I don't know about the rest." "Did you ever hear anyone talk about Alfred Siegfried or the V7s?" I asked. "Do you know what they were into?" "Everything. Anything. They didn't follow the same rules as the street bishops. They had no problems dealing, drugs, guns. It didn't matter." "What about women?" I asked. "I wouldn't be surprised. It's why I wanted to get out of there after they took over Bishop's Bar. I didn't want to turn tricks for them." "Were you turning tricks before?" "No, I danced. That was it." Before I could ask anything else, Riley put a hand on my shoulder, reminding me this wasn't Vice. This was gangs. We had a different goal in mind. "Jess," he said in that soothing way, "do you have any idea what Alfred Siegfried would take with him if he decided to flee the city?" "Probably whatever he could strap on his bike." "What about plants?" I asked. She looked at me like I was crazy. "What?" "Plants. We believe he had 6 small flower pots with him." "The V7s were in the drug biz. I never heard they were manufacturing their own product, but the bishops didn't know who Siegfried's connection was. As far as they knew, he didn't have one." "So you think they could have been running their own operation?" Riley rubbed his chin. "That would explain why we didn't have any details on them or known connections to cartels or other crime organizations. But plants like poppies, coca, and even marijuana would have to be monitored closely for temperature and moisture. All sorts of factors go into it." "Maybe he got that stuff so he could transport them more easily. Then once he arrives, he'll worry about getting an indoor greenhouse going. He just needs the plants to stay alive until he gets settled," she suggested. I looked from Jessalyn to Riley. "Even if that's the case, that still makes very little sense to me." "I don't know," Jessalyn said. "I'm just telling you rumors I heard about the V7s. If it's not something like that, I don't know why Siegfried would have anything to do with planters or gardening." "We're missing something," Riley said. "Jacob suggested the same thing," I said. "It makes no sense, but it's the only theory we have." "All right," but neither Riley nor I was convinced. "Any idea where Siegfried would go if he left town?" Jessalyn dropped onto a chair and stared at the floor. "I have no idea. His boys should be able to tell you that. They'd know where he likes to go or would like to go, but I'm guessing he won't leave his bike behind." "We haven't found his bike," Riley said. "Every member of any MC that I've ever met always has one passion, and that's his bike. Siegfried would have wanted to make sure he put that somewhere safe, somewhere you wouldn't find it." Something flitted across her face. "I'd say if he leaves town, that's going with him." She reached for a pen and the tiny pad of paper the motel provided. After scribbling down a few things, she handed Riley the list. "These were the latest parts he got for it. You should ask the other members of the MC. They may be able to tell you what garage he uses, but if you find his bike, I'll bet you find him." She stared up at Riley with big doe eyes. "Do me a favor. When you see him, kill him. That's the only way it'll be safe for me to go home." 31. After returning to the station, Riley requested Deacon Reynolds be brought back for another round of questioning. I wasn't sure why he opted for Reynolds when we had dozens of other suspects in custody, but I didn't ask. While we waited for Reynolds to be transported from central booking, Riley worked his way through the former street bishops. "Where does Alfred Siegfried keep his bike?" Riley asked. Most of them couldn't answer. A few provided smart-ass remarks, varying in creativity, but Riley kept his cool, even after the fifth, "At your mother's house," response. "What's your parents' address?" I asked while we waited for the next one to be brought into the interview room. Riley gave me a look. "If you're looking for Siegfried's bike, I can assure you it's not there. However, if you're looking to meet my folks, then I say let's do it." I hadn't expected him to turn the tables on me, and he grinned, satisfied with his slick answer. Isaac Bertrand entered the room, escorted by a uniformed officer. This was the first time I'd seen him in person. From the look of recognition on his face, I had no doubts he'd been in the car when Riley almost went splat. Instead of asking the same set of questions, Riley pulled out the chair across from Bertrand, flipped it around, and straddled it. Resting his wrists on the back of the chair, he stared across at the handcuffed man. "Alfred Siegfried sent Striker King into this very interrogation room to kill Big Bill. He shot him in the head. His body was slumped over the table right where you are." Bertrand gave the table an uneasy look, pulling back and leaning away from it. "Don't worry," Riley said. "We mopped up." This wasn't the same interrogation room, but hearing those words made me a little queasy. I sucked in a silent breath and tried to think of something else. "Why are you telling me this?" Bertrand asked. "Because you'd do anything for Big Bill, including mowing down a police officer." Bertrand stared at him. "You can't prove that." "It doesn't make it any less true." Riley stared at him with a ferocity I'd never seen before. "But that's not why you're here. I'd say for someone willing to put it all on the line for Big Bill, you wouldn't want the man responsible for his death to get away with it." Bertrand gave the table another uneasy look. "I'm listening." "Siegfried's planning to run. He's going to leave the bishops and the V7s holding the bag. He's going to let you all go down for the crimes he forced you to commit while he rides off into the sunset." "That fucking bastard's gonna get his," Bertrand spat. Riley drummed absently on the chair back. "It'd be easier for you to dole out some street justice if Siegfried was in lockup with you." Bertrand stared at him. "What do you want?" "We're looking for Siegfried. We know he went back to his place to get something." "I wouldn't know anything about that." "I wouldn't expect you to," Riley said. "But maybe you know where he works on his bike or where he stores it." Bertrand stared at the table, attempting to control his facial muscles, which kept twitching and contorting in disdain. "The V7s had a few garages they like to use. I don't know if he'd keep it there." "Let us worry about that." Riley slid a legal pad and pen across the table. After Bertrand made a few scribbles, he got sent back to holding. Riley picked up the legal pad and tore off the top sheet. "What do you think?" he asked. I read the 3 garage names, which appeared to have been scrawled by a kindergartner. "I'll run them down and get us locations." I searched his eyes, wondering if he'd meant what he said to Bertrand, but his face gave nothing away. "He tried to kill you," I finally said. "Yeah. Are you okay?" Riley filled his lungs and tilted his head to one side. "Yeah." I gave him one last look, but he'd pushed the chair in and paced at the rear of the interview room, getting ready for Reynolds to show up. "Are you good in here, by yourself?" I asked. He watched me through the reflection in the glass. "I'm not by myself. Sam's on the other side." A faint knock sounded on the glass. I didn't know how he knew that, and I didn't ask. Instead, I took the page he had handed me and went to the door. "I'll be back as soon as I have something." When I emerged from the interview room, I found Detective Preston waiting for me in the hallway. She gave me a reassuring nod. "You guys did good in there." "Is he okay?" I asked. She glanced at the door that had closed behind me. "He's fine. He's just Michael." She reached for the page, so I let her see it. "This doesn't give us much. Bubba's, Lloyd's, and Pistons. You'd think they'd come up with something more original for garage names. See if any of these are legit businesses. I doubt they are, which means you'll have to get creative. Cross-reference them with the assholes we've brought in and their known aliases. More than likely, these garages are run by members of the MC. That's usually how they do it." "I'm on it." The search didn't take long. Preston's assumption had been partially incorrect. Bubba's and Pistons were real businesses with websites and everything. I wrote down the addresses and phone numbers. Then I did a quick search on the ownership and management, finding Bubba's was owned by one of the bikers we'd arrested. Pistons wasn't held by anyone we arrested, but that didn't mean the management didn't have close ties to someone in the MC. In fact, it looked like Pistons had lots of ties to various MCs. They specialized in custom parts and bodywork. The only garage I couldn't find was Lloyd's, so I followed Preston's instructions to the letter. Lloyd Cartwright, a founding member of the V7s, paid rent every month for a warehouse. That had to be the garage Bertrand had referenced, but it wasn't an actual garage. More than likely, it was a place where his brothers in the MC went to work on their bikes. I raced down the hallway, slowing as I approached the interrogation rooms. Preston wasn't waiting in observation anymore. A quick peek through the two-way mirror showed she had joined Riley inside the interrogation room while he spoke to Deacon Reynolds. Drumming my fingers against my thigh, I wondered if I should wait for them to finish, but this seemed too important, so I opened the interrogation room door. "Detective Riley, I need to speak to you." "Hold that thought." Riley gave Reynolds a hard look before joining me in the hallway. "What did you dig up on the garages?" I told him everything I found and what I suspected. He took the list from my hands along with the notes I'd jotted down. After giving it one last look, he tucked it into his shirt pocket. "You're thinking Lloyd's?" he asked. "It makes the most sense, but we shouldn't dismiss the other two possibilities." "Then let's find out. I'll see what Reynolds has to say about this. Find out if Jacob Miller has anything to add about Siegfried's bike or these garages." "You want me to fly solo?" "You're more than capable, Lex. I'll catch up with you in a few minutes." I wondered what Detective Lightman would think about this, but I had my orders. If Lightman didn't like it, it'd be Riley's head on the chopping block. That should have provided some comfort, but it didn't. Instead, I hurried to the break room where the Millers were patiently waiting while a uniformed officer kept an eye on them. "Jacob," I said, entering the room, "I need to ask you a couple more questions." "I already told you everything." I looked at his mom, seeing the annoyance on her face. She understood the danger her son was facing, even if he didn't fully comprehend what could happen to him if he failed to hold up his end of the bargain and we revoked his deal. "You mentioned your cousin spoke a lot about his bike during your chats." Jacob's ears perked up. "Yeah, but he didn't say much about it once he showed up." "Did he ever mention where he kept his bike? Kept it?" Jacob wasn't following along. "You know, when it rained or the weather was bad, where did he keep it?" "I have no idea." "Did he ever mention having to get it fixed?" I asked. "He did most of the work himself. He said that's what he and his friends did. I always pictured it was like those car racing movies where they all hung out together in a garage drinking beer and fixing shit." The kid glanced at his mom, but she didn't scold him for cursing. I smiled. "Right, a garage just like that one. I bet that's exactly what it was like for Al." "Maybe." "Did he mention where the garage was or what it was called?" Jacob shook his head, his gaze dropping to the floor. "That's what I imagined. I don't know if he ever said." I needed to come at this another way, so I redirected my attention to the vending machine and reached into my pocket for some dollar bills. After getting a bag of candy-coated chocolates, I took a seat at the table across from Jacob and opened the bag. "Why didn't you ask him where his bike was when he showed up at your house?" I popped a handful of candies into my mouth. Jacob eyed the bag in my hand. "I did." Since he was cooperating, I offered him the bag. He held out his palm and I poured a few into his waiting hand before retracting the bag. "What did Al say when you asked?" "He said a friend dropped him off." I ate some more chocolate. "But that doesn't answer your question. Where did he leave his bike?" "At a friend's." I poured more candy into the kid's waiting hand. "Which friend's?" He must have said," Miss Miller insisted. "Think, Jacob. This is really important." I could see it in the kid's eyes. He didn't want to get his cousin in trouble. "We need to find Al's bike," I said. "He told you he has enemies. If they find it, they're going to use it to lure him out and hurt him. We don't want that to happen." "But you want to arrest him," Jacob said. "You're going to do the same thing." "Al's done a lot of terrible things," Miss Miller interjected. "We don't want to hurt him," I said. "We want to bring him in safely. He can tell us his side of things. He'll get a fair trial." Jacob looked torn. "Tell her what you know," Miss Miller insisted. I ate another piece of candy while I waited. "I don't remember. It was a funny name," Jacob said. Putting down the bag of candy, I reached for a pen and wrote down the 3 garages along with several other random names that popped into my head. Then I pushed the list toward him. "Do any of these ring a bell?" Jacob read the list carefully. "He talked about working on his bike with Lloyd." "You're sure?" Jacob nodded. "Thanks." I handed him the candy and went out the door. Hopefully, Riley had gotten the same answer. 32. Undercovers had gone to the other two garages, Bubba's and Piston's, to make sure we weren't missing anything, but they didn't spot Siegfried or his bike. A judge had signed court orders for their records, but as far as we could tell, the only business Alfred Siegfried ever did with them was buy parts. That left Lloyd's warehouse. Lloyd Cartwright had vehemently denied our allegations, claiming he didn't run a garage or store any bikes inside his warehouse. But once we took a closer look at his financials, the big-ticket purchases said otherwise. Lloyd had retrofitted the interior with the machines and equipment needed to repair and rebuild motorcycles. Of course, Lloyd claimed those purchases had been personal in nature since he owned a fleet of bikes. "He's so full of shit," Riley said as we waited at the edge of the perimeter. "Lloyd Cartwright knew damn well Siegfried stowed his bike here, but he had no intention of ever telling us." He passed the binoculars to me. "He was one of the founding members of the V7s. It was him and Siegfried from the start. Did you really expect him to squeal?" "I guess not." Riley waited for SWAT to move into position. "I'm just glad Reynolds did." "What did you offer him as an incentive?" "I said I'd try to get his charges bumped down to felony murder. It'll shave years off his sentence. He was the only one we had in custody who was willing to deal. The rest weren't facing anything nearly as serious, and the uncertainty of our evidence and lack of eyewitnesses made it hard to give teeth to the threats I wanted to make." "You can't threaten suspects," I said. Riley snickered. "I meant promises." I handed him back the binoculars. Even though we'd gotten the intel, Lightman didn't want us involved in apprehending Alfred Siegfried after our previous failed attempt. Instead, we'd been sitting on the garage for days waiting for Siegfried to show. And now that he had, SWAT had moved in to assist the gang's unit in the takedown. It was an all-hands situation, but Riley and I were keeping our distance. If Siegfried fled, we'd see it happen. An airship was on standby, and we'd be able to point them in the right direction and take part in the pursuit, but I didn't think it'd get that far. "Execute!" The command came over the radio, followed by a sharp crack. "Flashbang," Riley said while we watched armored officers storm the garage. 30 seconds later, the radio went off again. "Suspect in custody." A moment later, Lightman verified it was Alfred Siegfried. From our spot, Riley and I watched Siegfried get dragged out of the building in handcuffs and shoved into the back of a squad car. Once I heard Code 4, I put my seatbelt on. Riley smiled, clicking his own belt into place. "We got him. It's about damn time, I'll say." He gave me that sexy grin of his. "I'm not sure we would have done it without you." "Yeah, right." He put the car in gear and headed for the garage. Now that Siegfried was in custody, we'd help clean up the mess, starting with evidence collection. We swept the entire warehouse, top to bottom. Every item we found in that retrofitted garage we bagged and tagged. I didn't know what the other teams collected, but I heard mention of more stolen goods and firearms found in the garage in the saddlebags on Siegfried's bike and on his person. This was it. Now we just had to put all the pieces together. We returned to the station, which was in utter chaos. So much had to be sorted. We worked for a few more hours, but I never came across the 6 flower pots Siegfried had taken with him from the miller's house. "What's wrong, Lex?" Riley asked, that secretive smile back on his face. Before I could answer, Lieutenant Peterson entered the squad room. "Listen up, people. You did good today, apprehending the ringleader of this crime wave. But we have a lot more work ahead in the days to come. So tonight I want everyone to go home, get some rest, and come back fresh and recharged. We've got paperwork to do and interviews to conduct before we hand everything over to the DA's office." "You heard the man," Lightman said. "Siegfried's waiting for a lawyer. We're going to hold him here until we're finished with him. We don't want him anywhere near his buddies who've been moved to central booking." "Looks like we've been ordered to get out of here," Riley said. "What are you doing tonight, Lex?" I wondered if this was a trick question. "Nothing." He waited for the area to clear before he bent down beside me as if studying my computer monitor. "You're coming to my place for dinner, and if you happen to bring an overnight bag, I won't tell Amber." "Didn't you say you weren't allowed to have guests in your apartment?" "I said my place was too messy for guests, but that was before I cleaned. I did it just for you. Something told me today would be a good day." Riley caressed my arm. "It's a good thing I changed the sheets before coming to work this morning, put groceries in the fridge, and have an entire meal planned. I even bought a bottle of wine." "You heard the lieutenant. The case isn't closed yet. We have a lot of work left to do." "Paperwork. Once we dot the I's and cross the T's, you'll be back in uniform. Sure, we could wait, but I feel like celebrating, don't you? Again, I could hear my superstitious aunt's words in my head. Aren't you afraid we'll jinx it? Siegfried's in custody. He's not going anywhere, and you still have to eat. Come on, I hardly ever cook. This may be your one and only opportunity to see what I can do in the kitchen. What do you say? I don't know. Don't overthink it. Come over for dinner and stay for breakfast. He saw the hesitation on my face. If you're not ready, that's okay. I'll settle for cuddling. I can be patient even though you've basically molested me on 2 prior occasions. Are you sure? I don't remember that ever happening. I'm pretty sure that was you, unless you have an identical twin or a clone. He pecked my cheek and stepped toward the door. Seriously, there's no pressure for dessert. Dinner and breakfast are okay with me. What time? I asked. 7. I'll see you then. 33. Taste it. Riley put his hand on the back of my head and pulled my mouth closer. Lean forward. I don't want it to drip down your shirt. Oh my God. I put my hand to my mouth, licking my lips. Your sauce is amazing. Where in the world did you learn to cook like that? My mom. He placed a spoon on the counter. I should have warned you not to wear white when I was making her infamous red sauce. Why is it infamous? It always stains an article of clothing. Mom said it's because it spatters while it simmers, but I think it drips off the bottom of the spoon when being tasted. He lifted the spoon off the counter, revealing an oval patch of tomato sauce stuck to the countertop. That's why I'm a detective. I thought it was because you look sexy in a dress shirt. That too. He filled a pot with water and set it on the stove next to the sauce. If you want an apron or a splatter guard, I'll get you one of my shirts to wear, but the safest thing to do is take off your clothes and hang them in the closet. The tomatoes aren't wily enough to get to them in there. What about my bra? You might want to lose that too, just to be on the safe side. Is it white? What do you think? He scrutinized my chest, enjoying having permission to ogle me. Nude. You really are a detective. I guess that badge didn't come out of a Cracker Jack box after all. Does that mean the handcuffs are real too? Everything's real, babe. The sexual innuendo and tension crackled between us. Why don't you grab a glass of wine and relax? Once the pasta cooks, we can eat. I can't believe you made your own pasta from scratch, and my parents claim we're Italian. What a joke. I'm not looking to start a family feud. I'm not claiming anything other than my mom is an awesome cook. She worked in a few restaurants when I was growing up. She always made sure there was extra at work so she could bring it home to feed the 5 of us. Wow, 3 sons, a police officer for a husband, and a full-time job. She sounds amazing. She is. And whenever you meet her, you'll have to tell her that her son is a terrific cook. Whenever I tell her that, she doesn't believe me. Perhaps it's because you use her sauce as an excuse to get women to take off their clothes. Maybe. He stirred the pasta. Is al dente okay? I don't want the noodles to turn to mush. That's great, but don't call them noodles. That's why she doubts your cooking skills. And never call sauce gravy, unless you happen to be in one of those households that feels completely different on the subject. I giggled at the absurdity that had been a few of my family gatherings. Are those Italian family secrets you're sharing? Yes, and if you tell anyone where you heard them, you'll be sleeping with the fishes. You need to work on your Godfather impression. You sound a little too Jersey Shore. Is there a difference? I hope so. He put the serving bowl on the table. Then he took a napkin, unfolded it, and tucked it into the top of my shirt. It's for your own protection. Trust me. I do. He met my eyes and smiled. It took you long enough. He sat across from me, offering the serving utensils. Dig in. It was delicious. At this rate, I might never leave Riley's apartment. He knew how to cook. He had excellent taste in wine, and he kept me amused. Maybe this should count as our first date. Hey, he ran his fingers over my hand. You zoned out on me again. Is everything okay? Fine. I was just reliving the great sauce versus gravy debate. It's scary how adamant my uncle can be. Riley looked like he didn't believe me, but he didn't push the issue. Instead, we finished eating and he cleared the table, picking up the pot to pour the leftovers into a container. When he returned, I burst out laughing. What? You weren't kidding. Those tomatoes are damn sneaky. I pointed at the red splotches covering his shirt. He sighed. Another casualty in the battle of man versus tomato. And again, the tomato is victorious. Take that off, I insisted, standing up and working on undoing the top buttons. The trick is to rinse the stain out before it has time to set.
Oh, I thought the point was to convince you to rip my clothes off.
Was it? He grinned.
A little bit.
Once his shirt was off, he grabbed my hips and held me close, the heat building between us. I ran my hands along his chest. Somehow, a few specks of tomato sauce had bled through his shirt and onto his skin. I reached for a napkin and wiped at the spot on his sternum.
The shirt can wait.
He kissed me, long and slow.
You can say stop any time you want, okay?
I didn't say anything, and he grasped my chin, refusing to kiss me again until I nodded. He lifted me onto the table and stood between my legs as we made out. When his hand moved to my belt, I broke away.
Your shirt,
I whispered.
I'll buy another one.
He laid me back against the table, my hands running through his hair. He kissed down my neck, nipping at my earlobe. Damn, he was good at that. A timer went off in the kitchen, but he ignored it. However, the constant beeping followed by the smell of something burning indicated something was wrong.
Michael, stop.
I pushed against his strong shoulders. Is the oven on? You're going to burn down your apartment. He leaned back so he could look at me.
I am that hot.
I laughed, and he gave me a final quick kiss before straightening up. While he went into the kitchen, I climbed off the table. Our first time wasn't going to be on his kitchen table. When he didn't return, I got curious. Do you need help in there? I stood in the doorway, finding Riley staring at a tiny potted cactus on his windowsill. I knew what he was thinking. We never found the flower pots.
They weren't at the garage or Siegfried's apartment, so why did he buy all that shit? There has to be a reason.
He rubbed a hand down his face and turned to look at me.
Sorry, I got distracted.
He moved closer, grazing my sides with his fingertips.
Where were we?
I spotted a tray of bread which had burnt to a crisp in the oven. Did you forget something?
You didn't want bread, did you?
I laughed. No, I'm good.
Great.
He moved to kiss me, but I turned my head away.
Are we moving too fast?
It's not that. He nodded, grabbing his shirt and holding it strategically in front of his body.
You want to wait until you transfer out of gangs.
He sighed.
I get it. It's okay. After all, this feels like our first real date.
This is our first real date.
Unless we count the hot dogs in the car, then we're up to, I don't know, a few dozen dates.
That was not a date. Work doesn't count as dating. I grabbed the shirt from his hands and went into the laundry room, which was a large closet connected to his kitchen. Turning the dials on the machine to pre-soak, I searched the cabinet for a stain remover.
What about the night we made out inside your apartment?
He asked.
Shouldn't that count?
That wasn't a date. It was something else.
Phenomenal?
I exhaled. It was, but I still feel bad about it. He watched me hunt for the stain remover.
Don't. I had fun, but I wish the events leading up to it had been better.
Yeah, I said, distracted.
What about the morning I first spoke to Amber?
He reached into the cabinet and hooked his finger around the handle of a plastic container before pulling it free.
Is this what you wanted?
Maybe you should do your own laundry, I suggested. He rested his hips against the machine.
I didn't ask you to do it.
I feel like I should do something. I sprayed the stain remover on the tomato sauce and gave it a gentle rub. That morning shouldn't count. It was the result of our first fight.
I'd like to pretend that didn't happen.
He pulled the detergent out of the cabinet and poured some into the machine. Me too.
Okay, so I guess this really is our first date, and I'm already half naked. You move fast, Lexie.
I laughed. Shut up.
Shouldn't you strip so we'll be evenly matched?
Not a chance, buddy. My clothes are staying on because if they come off, I don't know what will happen.
I have a pretty good idea.
Yeah, me too, but I didn't say it. You're that sure of yourself. I searched his eyes, surprised to find something more intense than excitement or lust.
I'm that sure of us.
Does that usually work for you?
I've never tried that line before. Why don't you tell me?
That surprised me. Really?
You're different, Lex. I've told you that. I don't invite women here, and I sure as shit don't cook for them unless we're in a relationship. But whatever this is between us, it's not going away. It doesn't matter if tonight's the night, or we wait 3 months, or 6 months, or however long it's going to take, because I'm not going anywhere.
His words terrified me, but they also excited me. Don't you think we should try to speed up that process? This time he didn't make a joke. Instead, he ran a hand through his hair.
We need to figure out what all that damn gardening equipment's for. Until we do, it's going to drive us crazy.
Us? You're the one thinking about it in the middle of our makeout session.
This is why I try not to take work home with me. It pops up at the most inopportune times.
That wasn't the only thing that popped up. I doubt we'll figure any of that out tonight. Maybe I should go.
Please don't.
He wrapped his arms around my waist.
I promised you breakfast, remember?
Yeah, but
nothing. Let me take you on a tour of the apartment.
He led me through the living room and into the bedroom. He opened the door and pointed.
That's the bed.
Okay.
That's the dresser and television.
He looked around.
Nightstand, closet.
He picked me up and tossed me onto the bed.
That's pretty much it.
Remote?
I can't believe I forgot the most important part.
He tossed it to me.
Anything else?
I snuggled against the pillow. No, that does it. Now don't expect me to move from this spot.
I wouldn't dream of it.
He left the room and brought my overnight bag to me.
Do you mind if I take a quick shower on account of the sauce?
Are you sure it's not gravy?
You told me it wasn't.
And you listened. That's a quality most men don't have.
In case you haven't figured this out yet, I'm not like most men.
I noticed, but I didn't say anything. I'll get changed and put on a movie. Did we finish the wine?
Not yet.
Then take your time. A girl needs a chance to get her drink on. Riley returned 10 minutes later. His dark brown hair was still wet, and he shook his head like a dog, earning a round of giggles. We only made it 15 minutes into the movie before our conversation turned back to the case. Riley grabbed a few notebooks and pens and poured us each a large glass of wine. Then we went over every aspect of the case again, but Siegfried's gardening obsession didn't factor into any of it. We were missing something. Whatever it was had to be important. Siegfried wouldn't have gone to all that trouble unless it fit into his plan. 34. The phone rang again, and I gave it a dirty look. It had been doing that almost non-stop for the better part of an hour. Apparently, there was some issue with the power grid which had resulted in outages, which always brought out the crazies. This was the last thing we needed today. "Hey, Lexie," Kemper said. "Have you seen who Alfred Siegfried hired to defend him?" "Who?" "Houston and Rollins." "Shit. How can he afford them?" "I guess he's been pinching his pennies." Kemper glanced down the hallway. "Lightman's not happy about this." "I'm sure no one in the prosecutor's office is either." I gave the paperwork another look, but we built a solid case, collected evidence, and went by the book. It shouldn't matter who's defending him. He's guilty, and I'm pretty damn sure we can prove it.
Let's hope so.
Kemper went back to sorting through his part of this mess while I tried not to let this latest tidbit distract me. Our case would be a lot more solid if we had some eyewitness accounts. A few of the street bishops had agreed to testify against Siegfried in exchange for leniency. But I'd heard enough horror stories to know how shyster defense attorneys would spin that on the stand. The last thing we needed was Alfred Siegfried to get away with his crimes. Jesselyn Belknap's warning came to mind. While I worked, I watched the detectives take turns in the interrogation room. This case was too important, so I didn't think Kemper, Hawking, or I would be invited to participate. Not that I had any desire to spend more time in an interrogation room, especially after all the interviews we conducted yesterday. But I didn't like feeling left out either.
"Hey, Sarconi,"
Lieutenant Peterson called.
"You've earned yourself a break. Go downstairs and help the desk sergeant while Pickens is getting lunch. The sarge is overwhelmed with redirecting all the calls that are coming in today. I don't want to leave her by herself, even if it's only for an hour."
"Yes, sir." I saved my files, made sure everything was organized that needed to be, and headed for the stairs. "Where are you going?" Kemper teased when he saw me leaving. "The LT asked me to fill in downstairs." "Peterson doesn't normally speak to us. You must have really screwed up." I knew he was messing around. "The Sarge needs help with the phones. Even a trained monkey can do that."
"Obviously not, or they would have asked you,"
Riley said, his tone icy. He'd just returned from watching Lightman take a stab at Siegfried and had no idea what was going on.
"And I don't want to hear any more disrespect coming out of your mouth. It's one thing to joke around, but you never know when to quit. Should I recommend they send you for sensitivity training or personal communication skills classes?"
"No, sir," Kemper replied. Riley looked fit to be tied.
"Good.
Are you okay, Detective?" I asked.
"Just waiting my turn to take a crack at Siegfried."
His expression softened when he looked at me. "I won't be gone long, an hour tops, but if you need any of my notes, they're on my desk."
"Get going, Lexie."
Riley jerked his chin toward the stairwell, winking at me. It was sweet he defended me, but I didn't want that to turn into something either. He didn't say anything else, but I felt his gaze on my back. When I got downstairs, calls were coming in left and right. The technicians couldn't figure out what was going on with the power grid, so they were shutting down power to parts of the city in an organized pattern to identify the source of the glitch in order to fix it.
"We're in a blackout zone," the desk sergeant said. "The generator should hold, but let's not take any chances. Reroute any non-emergency calls to a different station."
"Yes, ma'am." While the desk sergeant called all off-duty personnel to prepare for a possible citywide blackout, I fielded the calls we were receiving. Some people had questions about the blackout. Others had security concerns. Several were reporting crimes, mainly robberies, looting, and car accidents. Apparently, the call center was flooded, which is why we were getting so many calls that usually went directly to 911.
"What is this, Friday the 13th?
I asked.
The desk sergeant snorted. "Obviously not, since it's Tuesday, but I bet my ass it's a full moon."
I wouldn't doubt it. In the midst of the madness, Riley came down the stairs.
"Lex."
He sidled up to the front desk, seeing how jammed we were.
"Jack said I'm next to take a run at Siegfried. You want in?"
"I'm a little busy. Do you have everything you need?"
"Yeah."
He glanced at the desk sergeant, who was too busy to pay attention to our conversation.
"Jack hasn't asked a single thing about the stripper or the gardening. I'll see what Siegfried has to say when I hit him with it."
"Let me know what you find out." He tapped the desk as he stepped back.
"When you finish down here, meet me upstairs. I'm guessing I'll be a while."
"Did Lightman give us the okay?" Riley nodded.
"You earned your spot, Lex."
"All right, I'll try to join you, but don't get your hopes up. Things are crazy."
"They're always crazy when the city has power issues. The dark brings them out, like vampires or zombies,"
the desk sergeant said, catching the tail end of our conversation.
"See you later."
Riley nodded to the desk sergeant and headed back up the stairs. After he left, I went back to answering phones, hoping Officer Pickens would return from lunch so I could see what was happening upstairs.
"You want to join him, don't you?"
the desk sergeant asked. She shook her head, making a tisk sound.
"I do like watching him walk away."
She was in her mid-40s with graying hair. From the gold band around her finger, I assumed she was married.
"I don't think I've ever seen him personally invite someone to join him for an interrogation before. That's new."
"We were partnered together on this case."
"The biker thing?"
"Yeah." The phone rang again.
Damn it.
She spoke briefly to the person on the other end before hanging up.
"The commissioner wants us to transport everyone we have in holding to central booking in case of anything. Since we're in the blackout zone, he wants the crooks gone before the lights start flickering. We don't need any lawyers saying the power outage counts as cruel and unusual punishment."
She picked up a phone to call for a transport vehicle. "Does that include suspects we're currently interrogating?"
"It should, but there might be ways around it."
She realized where my mind was.
"Inform Detective Lightman and the rest of the gang's unit what's going on. They'll want to prepare since keeping your suspects apart is vital to your case. I can handle things down here."
"Thank you, ma'am." I raced upstairs, glad to find Lightman in the squad room.
"Alfred Siegfried isn't going anywhere. I'll take care of it."
Lightman headed for Lieutenant Peterson's office, and I went down the hallway to find Riley. 35. I knocked on the door before opening it. Detective Riley had his palms on the table, standing over Alfred Siegfried, who looked so smug. I feared Riley would knock the look off his face. Mr. Rollins, Siegfried's attorney, maintained a perfect poker face, almost too perfect. Something told me he wasn't pleased with whatever his client had just said or done, and wanted to make sure he remained outwardly unbiased.
"It'd be best to help yourself here,"
Riley warned.
"Oh, you'll see exactly why my gardening is so important in due time."
Siegfried sat back in the chair and smiled.
"Your case is bound to crumble, Detective. This is your last chance. Let me go and save yourself some trouble."
"Detective," I said, causing Riley to look up. "May I have a word?" Before he could move an inch, the lights flickered a few times before turning off. All four of us stared up at the fixture, waiting to see if the power would come back. After 30 seconds and a loud mechanical whine, the generator kicked on, causing the lights to return, slightly dimmer.
"Interesting. Did you forget to pay the power company?"
Siegfried asked. Riley ignored it and joined me at the door.
"What is it?"
I jerked my chin skyward. "The commissioner wants everyone moved to central booking until the fluctuations and outages in the power grid are fixed," I informed Lightman. "He said he'd make sure that didn't happen, but he wanted you to get the heads up in case you have to stall."
"Since you're here, you might as well stay."
"If you insist." Riley went back inside the room and I followed him. Siegfried looked up at us.
"Did I hear something about getting moved?"
"No way." Riley gave him a contemptuous smile.
You're not going anywhere. I wouldn't be too sure about that. Siegfried studied me. I don't think we've been introduced.
Officer Sarconi, I said. Siegfried mentally filed it away, which left an uneasy feeling in my stomach.
Let's get back to it,
Riley said, folding his arms and staring at Siegfried.
You were just about to tell me what you were doing at your cousin's place.
Visiting family, Siegfried said. The lights flickered again.
Shouldn't those in custody be moved to a central holding facility when a station is experiencing difficulties?
Mr. Rollins asked.
We've got it covered, Riley said. If you're afraid of the dark, we can pick this up at a later date.
Siegfried looked up at the lights.
Maybe you should be afraid of what happens in the dark.
He gave Riley an icy look before making a kissing sound at me.
Did you have something to do with this? Riley asked.
How could I have possibly done that? Do you think I did something to the main relays or the transformers? That would have been something, huh? Or are you saying I hacked into the power system and turned everything off? I've been here the entire time. Obviously, I have nothing to do with any of this.
Siegfried jerked his chin at the ceiling before turning to his attorney.
I'd say they are trying to railroad me by coming up with even more bogus charges.
Rollins reached into his briefcase and pulled out a file.
The case against my client is circumstantial at best. You have no evidence or proof that he had anything to do with what other members of his motorcycle club were doing. He simply ran a club, meant for recreation and enjoyment by fellow motorcycle enthusiasts. He can't control the other members' actions. That's bullshit. We can place Siegfried at the pawn shop. He sold stolen property and ran from us. He was afraid.
Rollins slid a signed statement across the table which his client had previously written.
He feared for his life. He feared for his freedom, Riley said, barely glancing at the paperwork. He didn't know the items were stolen. He had illegal firearms in his possession when we arrested him. He discovered those hidden inside the warehouse and was on his way to turn them in when you found him. As you know, that warehouse does not belong to my client. It belongs to another member of the V7s. One would assume anything contained within is the property of that man.
The lights went out again, and it took another 20 seconds before they returned to full power.
You should release my client now, Rollins said. I'd hate to point out the harsh conditions in which you are holding him. His basic rights are being denied. Fluorescent lighting isn't a basic right.
Riley narrowed his eyes.
What did you do to the electricity, Siegfried?
Siegfried smiled.
It's not the power you should be worried about.
What does that mean?
Before Siegfried could reply, a loud boom sounded outside the window. It was strong enough to shake the building and plunge the room back into darkness. This time, the power didn't return.
Lex, are you okay?
I nodded, peering out the permanently attached metal slats which allowed the slightest bit of light to filter in from the window. It looked like something exploded.
Where there's smoke,
Siegfried sighed.
It looks like your clock's a little slow. You might want to fix that.
You can't continue to hold my client here. Not with a power failure and who knows what happening outside. It's not safe. I request he be moved immediately,
Rollins said.
Until we know what's going on, for everyone's safety, we'll be locking down the building.
Riley turned to me.
Sarconi, find out what's going on. I'll keep an eye on things here.
The last thing he wanted to do was give Siegfried a chance to escape. Dashing out of the interrogation room, I only made it halfway down the hall when I spotted Detective Devereaux heading toward me. Was that an explosion? I asked.
The generator blew up. 1 minute it was fine, the next it was a fireball spitting shit out everywhere.
Was anyone hurt?
Not seriously. We have guys checking it out now. Jack wanted me to make sure the interrogation rooms were locked down. No unauthorized personnel in or out. We don't want a repeat of the Big Bill incident or something worse.
That's what Riley said.
Mike knows what he's doing, at least some of the time. Come on, let's get back there and help him out. Siegfried's the only suspect we have in the box right now. Everyone else is in the process of getting cleared out.
Riley looked at us when we returned.
What happened, Frank?
The generator,
Devereaux said. Siegfried smiled.
Kaboom.
If I find out you had something to do with it, you're going to be facing a world of hurt,
Riley said. Siegfried snickered.
Now you're threatening me. You can't do that. Want to bet?
Riley lurched forward and Devereaux grabbed his shoulder before he could do something that would jeopardize our case.
Easy, Mikey.
Devereaux waited for Riley to nod before he let him go. He turned back to Siegfried.
Looks like it's just the 5 of us alone in this room. If you don't want to talk, maybe I'll remind everyone of all the wonderful things I heard and saw you do.
Siegfried sneered.
I knew you were trouble, which is why I kicked you out.
You tried to have me killed, Devereaux said.
I said I wanted you gone. I had nothing to do with whatever those men did in the alleyway.
They have a very different story to tell. Devereaux took a seat across from Siegfried and put his feet up on the corner of the table. But you know that, and you know there's no way out of this mess. You're caught. Confess or don't. That's up to you. Personally, I hope you keep your damn mouth shut. It'll make it that much sweeter when the judge throws the book at you. Siegfried stretched as best he could while handcuffed and settled into his chair.
You're holding me in a building with no electricity. That seems like it could explode at any moment, or catch fire, and you think you're going to come out on top? I don't think so.
Rollins had been quiet for most of the interview, but he pulled out his phone to check some things.
This won't reflect well on the police department. I will be filing a formal complaint and petitioning the court to have the charges dropped for insufficient evidence and police bias. In fact, I have several judges on speed dial.
Good for you, Riley said. Make whatever calls you want, but this is an extreme situation. The steps we are taking are meant to ensure everyone's safety, including your clients. You can't prove otherwise. You'd be surprised. Rollins started to dial. Siegfried hadn't taken his eyes off me since I returned to the room.
Are you scared, baby?
I knew better than to engage, so I gave him an icy stare. I suggest you refrain from speaking unless you plan on answering questions or confessing.
How about we make a deal?
Siegfried asked.
You let me go, and I make sure nothing else in this city goes boom.
Riley stopped pacing.
You mean to tell me you had something to do with the generator going up? My client didn't say that,
Rollins said, putting his phone down when he found the circuits jammed.
And until the power comes back, he will refrain from speaking at all.
But Alfred Siegfried wasn't a man who took orders. He was one who gave them.
Actually, I have it on good authority 6 devices have been hidden throughout the city, which are set to go off in the next few hours. I'll make sure that doesn't happen, but only if you sign these papers and let me go.
Again, my client isn't admitting to having any involvement in anything,
Rollins said, but panic entered his eyes. I didn't think he knew what his client had intended to do, but he was stuck defending him. The 6 flower pots, I said. The fertilizer and nails. He built bombs. Riley met my eyes.
No wonder we didn't find them.
And you won't unless you let me go.
Siegfried looked convinced he'd won.
For the record, my client never made those purchases and had nothing to do with constructing or hiding the materials. That was all Jacob Miller.
Miller says otherwise, Devereaux corrected. Common sense says otherwise, I retorted.
Jacob's lying,
Siegfried said.
The kid has always been troubled. Maybe that's a byproduct of a nasty divorce. You can't believe a word he says. But I know how he thinks, what he'd do. I can prevent mass casualties, but only if you let me go.
That's not how this works, you lying sack of shit,
Riley said.
Miller's been in custody for days. He's cooperating. This is all you. No one will ever believe otherwise. Tell us where you planted the devices and we'll consider not charging you with domestic terrorism.
But Siegfried couldn't care less about the bombs. He was determined to come up with a feasible scapegoat, and he had settled on his juvenile cousin.
Think about it. Jacob has disdain for authority. Didn't I hear whispers that he tried to kill 2 police officers who came knocking on his front door? Why would you make a deal with someone like that or believe a word he said? He could have easily set those devices with timers. Drop all charges, and I'll help you find them.
How about you tell us where they are and we make sure you survive long enough to make it to trial?
Siegfried jerked his chin toward the window.
I'm guessing one of them was right out there. Go see for yourself, and when you're ready to let me go, I'll tell you where you might find the others.
36. I can't believe he'd do this, I said.
Why not?
Riley ran a hand through his hair.
This asshole always has a trick up his sleeve, some way to redirect our attention. He must have realized how close we were when we arrested everyone in the MC. He's using the IEDs as another misdirect and a bargaining chip.
If he's even telling the truth,
Devereaux said.
I have a hard time believing him.
Is that a gamble we can take?
Lightman asked. It took 45 minutes for power to be restored. After that happened, Siegfried was taken to one of the empty holding cells where a few armed officers were keeping an eye on him. Mr. Rollins had left to file those complaints he threatened, but I suspected he wanted to get out of the potential blast zone.
The bomb squad searched high and low around the generator, but the search was inconclusive. They swept this building and didn't find anything. It could be a lie, but even if it isn't, we don't negotiate with terrorists.
The first thing we have to figure out is if Siegfried is telling the truth. For all we know, he bought that shit and tossed it in the first dumpster he passed.
I glanced at the clock. We were almost an hour into the 6-hour deadline. We hadn't received any reports of explosions. The bomb squad had swept every nearby police station, and officers were on alert to keep an eye out in public areas, which were deemed high-value targets. Bomb sniffers searched central booking, figuring Siegfried might have wanted to take out everyone who could testify against him in one fell swoop. But I couldn't figure out how he would have gotten access to the holding cells or why he would have wanted to be transferred there when the lights went out if he was going to detonate a device inside the building. And as we suspected, that search turned up nothing.
Are we sure there isn't a device inside this building?
I asked. Siegfried was all about getting transferred out of here. Lightman looked at me.
We checked and got the all clear. Yeah, but Siegfried wanted out. There must have been a reason he wanted to be transferred,
Riley said.
Maybe he was hoping to make a jailbreak before he ended up in jail,
Preston said.
There's no bomb. The generator exploding could have been a mechanical issue. I never liked those things. A few too many sparks, a buildup of carbon monoxide, and it's good night, folks.
Lightman shook his head.
But we can't bet that's the cause, so for the next few hours we do everything we can to figure out if Siegfried is telling the truth or if he's using the situation to his advantage.
How do we figure out what's what? Kemper asked.
We'll retrace his steps, Lightman said. Revisit the places we know he's been. Question his associates again and see if anyone has anything new to add, given the changing circumstances.
He muttered something to himself.
I'd love to put that asshole attorney in the hot seat.
Attorney-client privilege protects him, Preston said. Mr. Rollins looked just as shocked as we were when Siegfried started spouting out crap about bombs, I said. But even if he knew, Preston said, we'd never be able to prove it without violating privilege. Lightman didn't look deterred.
If this was Siegfried's plan all along, he must have made arrangements before he was arrested. Let's pull every camera feed we can find near the law office and warehouse.
He reached for the phone to make the call.
Sam, help me with this. Hawking and Kemper, I'll need you working on the footage as soon as we get it. Frank, go check Siegfried's hangouts. You know them better than anyone else. The garages have already been checked, but I'll have the bomb squad sweep them again for explosives. While they do that, Mike, you and Sarconi will check Bishop's Bar and any place else Big Bill considered sacred. Blowing up a dead rival's favorite hangout seems like something Siegfried would do. You should also have someone check the Miller's house, Riley said. Siegfried wants to pin all of this on Jacob. What better way than having an accident happen over there? Good call.
Lightman dialed and the rest of us dispersed. Be careful, Michael, Preston said. You too, Frank. I followed Riley down the stairs and out of the building. Even from here, I could see the remains of the generator. Shrapnel had blown into a few parked cars and marred the nearby sidewalk and street. Luckily, the injuries sustained hadn't been life-threatening. The sun hadn't set yet, but I didn't notice many interior lights as we drove past businesses. The last thing we needed was the insanity that came with power outages. All I could think about were those flower pots. They weren't very large. If Siegfried had made some sort of improvised explosive device, using fertilizer and nails, the damage would be contained to a small area. But it might have had enough bang to take out the backup generator. Do you think Siegfried orchestrated the blackout? I asked. Riley glanced at me, his shoulders and jaw tense.
I'd say yes, but there's no way he possesses that kind of access. He's an ex-con who runs a motorcycle club. More than likely he's full of shit. He's desperate, so he'll weave whatever tale comes to mind, and since I spent a good deal of time asking about the gardening supplies, he may have decided to turn the tables and use them against us.
But he had Jacob buy them for a reason.
Yeah, which is why I'm not sure if he's full of shit. I hoped Frank would be able to get a more accurate read on the guy, but he doesn't know either. The generator blowing up at the station doesn't feel like a coincidence to me.
Me neither. He parked outside Bishop's Bar and turned to look at me.
We have to be careful. I don't know what we're walking into.
I wish you did.
That makes two of us.
37. After circling the bar and checking for signs of foul play and finding none, Riley grabbed a set of non-regulation lockpicks from the glove box and crouched down to unlock the front door. I kept my head on a swivel. The neighborhood was getting darker by the minute. The sun was on the verge of setting. Already I noticed a broken window in the building across the street.
Were you a burglar in another life?
I asked when the door popped open. Riley tucked the picks away and reached for his weapon and flashlight.
I have some stories.
I bet you do. I gave our surroundings one last look, wondering if our car would be in one piece by the time we got out, reached for my own weapon and flashlight, and followed Riley inside. In the dark, the bar looked eerie, as if it were haunted by the ghost of the dead Big Bill. Maybe it was. Dust motes floated in our flashlight beams.
Check over there.
Riley gestured toward the other side of the room.
And watch your step. I wouldn't put it past Siegfried to have set a trap.
Copy. I kept an eye on the ground in front of me as I moved toward the back of the room while Riley checked the bar and the nearby booths and tables.
No flower pots over here,
Riley said. None here either. I crouched down beside the rickety stage that held the stripper's pole. But I may have found something. I put my flashlight on the ground beside me while I examined the scarred crevice separating the top of the stage from the side. We may need a crowbar.
Hang on.
Riley grabbed a Slim Jim from behind the bar and joined me. After a few tugs, he yanked one of the wooden planks out. Underneath the stage was a hollowed-out area.
This must have been where Big Bill kept his secret stash.
He pointed to a bag that remained wedged in the far corner.
Looks like someone forgot some of his loot.
Or it's booby-trapped.
I'll call it in.
Riley reached for his radio. Once we were told a bomb sniffer was on the way, Riley straightened.
Until we know for sure, let's give the stage a wide berth, but we should check the rest of the bar.
You mean upstairs? On our way to the hidden staircase, Riley examined some of the decor and checked behind the dartboard, but there was nothing else to find.
Stay behind me.
For the record, I hate it when you do that macho thing.
I let you go first last time,
he said.
It's my turn. Plus, I'm lead. Once you make detective, we can revisit this argument.
You're lucky you have a nice ass. He snickered, but my comment didn't distract him as we made our way behind the curtain. While he went up the stairs, I checked the remaining areas in that hidden hallway. Clear, I said.
Hang back 1 second.
Slowly, he turned the knob, keeping as much distance between him and the door as he pushed it open. When nothing went boom, he peered inside the room, sweeping the beam of light from right to left.
Okay, let's see what we have here.
I made my way up the stairs and joined him inside Big Bill's apartment. The funky smell from last time had only gotten worse, but I didn't spot the milk container on the counter. The dishes were no longer in the sink, and the bed had been made. Did someone hire a cleaning lady? I wondered. Riley pointed to the right, so I moved that way, finding tons of knickknacks and clutter on every surface.
The street bishops must have cleared the place out after Big Bill's demise. My guess would be the bartender tried to straighten up.
Detective Devereaux said the bartender loved this place. I searched every inch of my side of the room, but the only planter I found was a container that had once held mixed nuts and now contained nothing but cigarette and cigar butts. We've had eyes on this place since Siegfried disappeared. We would have noticed if he'd resurfaced here. Riley stood frozen in the doorway to the bathroom.
Are you sure about that?
On the bathroom counter was a small flower pot, like the ones Jacob had purchased from the hardware store. Is it armed? From where I was standing, it didn't look much like an explosive. Riley moved closer, finding it filled with what appeared to be soil.
I don't know.
He examined it more closely. A thin piece of twine ran through the center. I'll call it in, I said. Riley peered around the rest of the bathroom.
I don't see anything else.
I answered the bomb disposal expert's questions, passing the ones I couldn't answer off to Riley, who gently picked the pot up to examine the area beneath it. Whatever it contained was inside the pot.
Lex, stay out there.
What are you... Before I could finish asking my question, Riley dumped the pot into the sink. Thankfully, nothing went boom.
Son of a bitch.
What? I edged forward, wondering if the pot contained some sort of corrosive or chemical agent. Instead, it contained nothing but dirt and roots from a dead plant. False alarm, I said into the phone. Without waiting, Riley marched down the stairs, grabbed the Slim Jim, and used it to hook the corner of the bag from beneath the stage. Inside, he found a black hooded jacket. Inside the pocket was a note with the Stanfield storage unit number and instructions on where to find weapons, jewelry, and cash.
What a fucking waste.
Riley shoved the items into an evidence bag.
That bastard still has us chasing our tails. He really thinks he's going to get away with this.
He's not. Riley gestured at the bag.
Except this points the blame at Big Bill, and we still can't connect Stryker King to Alfred Siegfried.
Besides the V7's connection.
Lex,
King's dead. We don't have a paper trail, but we know Siegfried was using the MC to do his bidding, carry out his orders, and perform his hits.
Lex,
it's all on him. We have him, and while we've gotten a few of the street bishops to talk, it may not be enough. We need a victim to shed light on this. Sure, we have the Millers, but Siegfried's already working on spinning that. And I'm sure Rollins thinks that's an ace up his sleeve since the kid shot at us. After all, Jacob bought these damn flower pots, which is why we're on this wild goose chase.
Lexie, stop. Riley put his hands on my shoulders. Damn, and I thought I'd seen you worked up in your apartment that night. I shook my head.
We'd had eyes on all these places. This bar, Siegfried's apartment, the garages, everywhere we knew to look. Sure, Siegfried slipped back into his apartment, but that was because he created an opportunity by distracting us with the anonymous tip. But that was the only time he had that chance. Jesselyn will cooperate, maybe, but the last time we spoke to her, she sounded iffy. I nodded down at the evidence bag, which contained the hooded jacket and note we found. Lightman probably won't go for it, but I think we should go on the offensive. We approach the Stanfields again and see if they'll cooperate. What do you think? He looked around the bar, where we had wasted over an hour.
Okay.
38. As the sun set and the sky grew darker, more reports started coming in. The rolling blackouts brought the lunatics out of the woodwork. Every available officer was responding to calls. Grand Larceny Division seemed to be the busiest, but everyone was tasked with assisting, which meant manpower was being diverted from our hunt for the alleged explosives.
This is what Siegfried wants, Riley said. We're spread so thin he must think we'll give in to his demands.
If the threat's real, maybe we should. Saving lives is more important than making a case, but he's killed before, and he'll do it again. I don't know that I believe him, particularly after what we found inside Big Bill's bar.
My thoughts exactly.
Riley turned down the next street, which was brightly lit compared to the block we'd just left.
I guess we're looking on the bright side now.
I laughed. How long do you think it'll take for the power company to get this situation handled? It's already been half a day since we received the warning.
The last report said they found the glitch and are resetting the system. Everything should be back to normal within the hour.
Doesn't that coordinate with the timeline Siegfried gave us for the potential detonations?
It does.
Again, I don't see that as a coincidence.
Me neither,
Riley admitted. He parked in front of the Stanfield's apartment building just as a call came in on the radio. A neighbor reported a fire at the Miller's house. The fire department arrived to find the house decimated as if it had exploded. They suspected a gas leak, but they didn't have all the intel.
Arson and bomb squad are on the way,
dispatch informed us. Riley's phone rang and he grabbed it.
Where do you want us, Jack?
He drummed his hand on the steering wheel while he listened.
Fine. We'll finish up here and head over. Is Frank okay?
He waited for the caller to respond.
Good.
What happened? I asked.
Frank finished checking Siegfried's hangout, so he went to the Miller's place. He was halfway up the walk when everything went boom. He got thrown back a few feet. His ears are still ringing, but he's okay.
He was there when it happened? Dispatch said a neighbor called it in.
A neighbor did call it in, but when the fire department arrived, they found Frank on the front lawn. That's when Frank called Jack.
Riley fidgeted, looking uneasy. If you'd rather we go.
No. We find a way to stop this, and since Siegfried isn't going to tell us what we need to know, then we squeezed him until he does. I just hope we can convince the Stanfields to tell us everything we need to know.
Determined, he got out of the car, marched up the steps to their floor, and knocked on the door. When they didn't answer, he banged a little harder.
This is the police. Open up,
Riley announced. Something's wrong, I said. I thought I heard a noise inside. Riley tried again.
Do you want to give it a go?
Catherine, Stewart, this is Officer Sarconi. Let us in. I tested the knob, surprised to find it unlocked. Mr. and Mrs. Stanfield. I pushed the door open, only to be knocked backward when something exploded against the door, slamming it against me and knocking me onto my ass.
Lexie.
Riley ran to me, his focus split between me and the slightly ajar door, which was now impaled with 24 nails.
Are you okay?
Shaking off the jolt, I nodded. That was all Riley needed to hear to enter the apartment. He did a quick sweep, finding the place had been cleared out. The few things that hadn't been stolen during the home invasion were gone.
It looks like they fled.
Riley studied the front door, finding pieces of shattered ceramic on the ground.
I'd say we found one of Siegfried's flower pots. The damn thing sprayed nails like a porcupine.
He turned back to look at me, making sure I didn't get hit. The blast was small and contained. Dispatch said the Miller's place was decimated.
Maybe he attached one of these devices.
Riley tapped the toe of his shoe beside the ceramic dust.
To the gas line. He would have had more time to plan things out with Jacob at school all day. Maybe he set up something even more elaborate, a fertilizer bomb or something to that effect.
He must have used a timer.
Riley crouched down. This was a trap, no timer. He was waiting for someone to enter the apartment. He probably wanted to take out the Stanfields, figuring they'd return after news of his arrest spread. But again, we can't prove it, and after Mrs. Stanfield was released from the hospital, she refused our protection. We had too much going on to maintain eyes on her.
Riley gave the place one last look and phoned Lightman.
I told you,
Siegfried said, smug as always.
More devices are out there, and you have 20 minutes to get to them before they go boom.
Do you really want to risk more casualties? There were no casualties,
Lightman said.
Not yet.
Siegfried jangled his wrists in front of the detective.
My offer's still on the table. Take these off and the city will be safe.
Anything but.
Lightman glanced at the police captain standing in the doorway. The commissioner had insisted we play along, fearing our inaction to stop an attack would result in a lawsuit the city couldn't win.
If you take us to the other devices and help us disarm them, we won't charge you with terrorism.
Correction, you won't charge me with anything,
Siegfried insisted. Lightman worked his jaw.
Don't do it, Jack,
Riley said from behind the two-way mirror.
Only if you come through, then you have a deal.
Saying those words caused Lightman physical pain. In fact, it caused all of us physical pain. Siegfried looked at Rollins, who gave his nod of approval.
Okay, great. Let's get going. We're on a clock.
I never should have reported the second detonation,
Riley said.
Siegfried doesn't deserve a deal. His first 2 targets were empty dwellings. We have no reason to think the next 4, if there are even 4, are going to cause harm to anyone else.
We can't take the risk. Frank rubbed the bandage at the side of his face where he'd sustained a mild burn.
We keep people safe, and we haven't been able to do that at all with the way this clown's been running his MC and taking over Big Bill's turf.
I watched Siegfried climb to his feet, holding out his bound hands.
Not until you prove yourself,
Lightman insisted.
Fine. Check the back patio at John Wolfe's house. My cousin left him a surprise, but you might want to hurry.
Siegfried nodded at the clock.
If I remember correctly, that's running slow.
Within minutes, patrol verified another flower pot had been located. This one concealed a pipe bomb filled with nails like the one Riley and I had encountered. Stepping onto the back patio from inside the house would have triggered it, just like opening the front door had triggered the detonation at the Stanfields' apartment.
The other 2 are trickier. You'll need me there to disarm them.
Siegfried held up his wrists.
And I'll need my hands free to do it.
Where?
Lightman asked. Siegfried shook his head.
I'll give you directions once we're on the road, or you could let me go alone. I don't really need you cramping my style.
He's a psychopath, Frank muttered. That's only 5, I said. Where's the 6th? Riley stormed into the hallway as a group of armed officers and Lightman escorted Siegfried and Mr. Rollins out of the interrogation room.
Where's the last device?
Last device?
Siegfried snorted.
Learn to count. The first one took out this building's generator. How else would I have known your clock was running slow?
You set these yourself,
Riley said.
I did no such thing. I told you, it's my cousin. I fully expect you to charge him for these heinous crimes, or I'll go to the press.
Riley fumed, but one warning look from Lightman and the captain forced him to back off.
Keep an eye on Mike, Frank whispered to me. When he gets like this, all bets are off. Lex, let's go, Riley called, watching as Lightman got behind the wheel.
Mr. Rollins slid into the passenger seat and 2 armed officers sandwiched Siegfried into the back.
I'm not letting that bastard out of my sight. I'll hold down the fort here, Frank said. Jack told me I have to sit this one out, but I'll make sure Siegfried didn't leave us any other surprises.
39. Siegfried led us to a bar. It wasn't near the V7's turf. In fact, it had never been on our radar. Siegfried's financials never showed he had been here before. The place wasn't crowded, but it wasn't empty either. 20 people were inside.
Wait here while we clear everyone out.
Lightman grabbed Siegfried's shoulder and shoved him back against the side of the car.
What about the cuffs?
I'll take them off after the bar's empty.
Fine, we'll wait, but you better make it quick. We only have a matter of minutes, maybe 2, maybe 5, maybe less than 1.
Siegfried rubbed his face.
I held up my end of the deal. If you fuck this up, that's not my fault. Every damn bit of this is on you. You're a fucking psychopathic killer. I'm going to enjoy watching you burn.
Lightman pressed his lips together, but I could see the wheels turning.
Riley, Sarconi, help the bomb squad clear the place. Officers Evans, Gallo, and Trust, get the civilians out. Don't cause a panic. Just take care of it.
Lightman turned back to Siegfried.
As soon as they find these devices, you're going to tell the bomb squad how to disarm them, and I'm going to make sure you're standing right in the blast zone while they do it. If you think you're going to put one over on us, you're mistaken. I wouldn't dream of it. Like I've been telling you, I had nothing to do with any of this. You already arrested everyone who participated in criminal activity, but I'm innocent, like a virgin on prom night.
I followed Riley inside the bar. The dog handlers had already spread out, but all the liquors and perfumes made it harder for them to detect. That would slow things down. Meanwhile, 3 other members of the unit conducted a thorough sweep as they made their way through the place. For the most part, the patrons paid little to no attention to the intrusion, which was making the officers' jobs much harder. Part of me wanted to yell fire or bomb to get them to clear out, but I knew a panic was the last thing we needed, and given the volume on the stereo, I didn't think they'd hear me anyway. Riley flashed his badge at the bartender while I went down the side hallway and checked the office and kitchen. When I came to a closed door, I hesitated, afraid opening it would lead to another detonation. "What's behind here?" I asked the bartender.
The storage room.
"Have you been inside today?"
I just went in there. We ran out of whiskey.
Cautiously, I turned the knob and eased the door open a few inches. When nothing exploded, I went inside. Hidden behind a large metal keg, I found the 2 remaining flower pots. Several different colored wires connected them together while duct tape held what I could only imagine was a battery to the front of the contraption. A red digital timer was counting down. 2:57, 2:56, 2:55. "Michael, I found it. It's on a timer." He appeared in the doorway behind me, yelling for the bomb squad. That commotion caused the few remaining drunks to take notice, but they didn't seem scared or worried. They turned on their stools, ready for a show.
"Get these people out of here," Riley ordered the officers. "Drag them out if you have to."
2 of the bomb techs turned to us.
"With all this alcohol, this room is a powder keg. If that goes off, it'll take down the building, not just the bar, but the entire building."
Nodding, Riley grabbed my wrist and yanked me out of the room.
"Get out of here,"
he told the bartender.
"As far as you can."
Then we tried to push our way outside. The patrons hadn't wandered far enough from the front door.
"Get back. Everyone get back,"
Riley ordered. I worked the crowd to the left, hoping to clear a path. As soon as I could see past the people who'd basically created a wall around the front door, I spotted Lightman on the ground beside the car. I ran to him. He shook himself. His throat was bruised and swollen from the chain and swivel from a pair of handcuffs. "Where's Siegfried?"
"That way,"
Lightman choked out, clutching his neck and coughing.
"Go!"
I took off in the direction he pointed. I knew this had to be another distraction. Siegfried had planned his escape from the beginning. He orchestrated the entire scenario in order to get away. But the bomb inside the bar didn't look like a misdirect. It looked real. And since this neighborhood hadn't even been on our radar, we weren't prepared for this. Spotting Siegfried, I willed my legs to go faster. Everything else turned into a blur as I ran after him. I didn't see so much as feel Riley behind me. He was close. His presence reassured me, but I didn't slow. I was going to catch that son of a bitch. Siegfried ran down an alleyway. I chased after him, gaining even as my lungs burned and the muscles in my legs threatened to cramp. But I kept moving. He yanked open a side door into whatever building this was and disappeared. I reached the door before it had time to close and slipped inside. I caught a glimpse of him turning the corner. He couldn't be more than 10 feet away. I charged forward, aware of the door slamming behind me. I didn't hear any footsteps. Then again, I couldn't hear much over my pounding heart and ragged gasps. Rounding the corner, I was shocked to find a nearly empty furniture store. Only a few dim lights on the ceiling provided illumination. "Give up, Siegfried." I scanned my surroundings. I was right behind him. He couldn't have gotten far. Not more than a few feet, which meant he was hiding. But where? I forced my breathing to slow as I held the flashlight beneath my firearm, slowly sweeping the light over the furniture displays. A shadow moved behind the oversized sofa. Cautiously, I moved toward it. A battle cry sounded from behind the armoire. I spun, glimpsing Alfred Siegfried coming at me with an iron fireplace poker raised above his head. Riley darted out of the shadows. The whoosh of air hit me before I even had time to properly aim at Siegfried, but the lethal blow never landed. Instead, Riley tackled him. The sound of flesh slamming into flesh echoed as the two crashed into a hutch. Glass shattered around them as Riley fought to subdue Siegfried. My body moved on its own, training taking over as I attempted to help, but with the way they were locked together in battle, I couldn't risk firing for fear I'd hit Riley. Holstering my weapon, I grabbed Siegfried and tried to haul him off Riley. Siegfried reared back, knocking me into a tall bookcase. We hit hard enough to cause the bookcase to rock. Locking out Siegfried's left arm, I reached for my cuffs, getting one bracelet clasped around his left wrist before he broke free from my grip. The bookcase tipped over, crashing into my back and pinning me to the ground.
"Lexie!"
Riley bellowed, drawing on Siegfried before firing one shot and then another. He raced to me, struggling to get the heavy piece of furniture off of me.
"Lex."
"I'm okay." I stared through the darkness at Siegfried. He wasn't dead. He was still moving, crawling toward the exit. I wasn't sure where he'd been shot, but Riley hadn't executed the traditional double tap, one in the shoulder and one in the leg, maybe. After a Herculean grunt, Riley freed me from beneath the bookcase. It banged against the ground, bits of wood chipping and breaking away. He let out a few deep exhales and checked my back.
"Stay still, Lex. You could have spinal cord damage."
"I'm fine. See?" I moved my legs and arms as I pulled myself up and moved to where Siegfried had crawled. "You're under arrest, asshole, and there's no way you're getting out of it this time." I yanked his right arm up and finished cuffing him. Riley was beside me, his gun back in its holster.
"It doesn't matter. You're too late,"
Siegfried said, a maniacal laugh overtaking him. I saw the look on Riley's face. "Michael, don't. It's over. We got him." I peered out the front door, but we were facing the wrong way. We should have felt the blast. Maybe they disarmed the bomb. Siegfried continued to laugh, and then he started to gurgle. Riley returned to his senses. "Shit." He crouched on the ground beside me and administered first aid. Siegfried may have deserved to die, but we'd prefer if it didn't happen on our watch. I grabbed the radio announcing the suspect was down and requested an ambulance while Riley fashioned a tourniquet and tied it around Siegfried's leg.
"Copy."
Lightman's gruff voice came back.
"We're code 4 over here."
I sighed. And I thought working Vice was hard. 40. Now that I was no longer buzzing from the adrenaline surge, I realized just how much we could have lost. First, the explosion at the Millers, then the close call at that bar and the fight with Siegfried in the furniture store. Any one of them could have proven fatal. After backup and the ambulance arrived and Siegfried had been carted away, Riley had been forced to hand over his firearm and speak to the scene investigators. Firing on an unarmed man was never a good thing, but given the circumstances, I hoped he'd be cleared of any potential wrongdoing. Thankfully, a cache of hidden firearms had been discovered in one of the storage chests inside the furniture store. They had been reported stolen during the crime spree. Siegfried had hidden them inside the store. He had everything planned out. We even found a second go bag with $1,000 and a fake ID. That had been his contingency in case he got caught at the garage. I just wondered when he had time to plant the bombs. I'd already spoken to the detectives assigned to investigate the shooting, and I'd written my report. There was nothing left for me to do, but I couldn't leave. I had to know if Riley was okay. A skeleton crew remained at the station to handle any walk-ins, but with the earlier power problems and the potential bomb scare, it wasn't business as usual. But it would be by the morning.
"Sarconi,"
Lightman whispered, his throat still sore from nearly being crushed.
"Shouldn't you call it a day?"
"Any word on Siegfried?"
"Hospital said the bastard will pull through. Maybe if Mike hadn't been so quick with that first aid, things would be different."
He shrugged, and I wondered if he meant what he said. "What about Riley?"
"He'll be fine. This is routine. Bastard tried to kill a cop, so Mike shot him."
His eyes narrowed.
"Isn't that what happened?"
"Yes, sir."
"I heard you found the bomb in the bar. The bomb squad disarmed it with less than 20 seconds to spare. I'm glad you were quick about it, and I'm even more impressed you were so quick to catch Siegfried. I swear if he got away again, I'd—"
"You'd what, Jack?" Preston asked. "Try to force him into submission by letting him wrap something else around your neck?"
"There was so much going on between the bomb and the evacuation. I pulled out the handcuff key, and that's when he attacked. Then he grabbed the key, tossed the cuffs, and took off running. It could have happened to anyone. I doubt you could have done better."
Preston gave me a sly smile. Of course not, Jack. He glowered at her. I'm calling it a night. Make sure you do the same. Preston swiveled her chair around to face me and waited for Lightman to leave before she asked, What are you still doing here? Are you worried about Michael? Is it that obvious? It's procedure. Believe it or not, we deal with this type of thing on a semi-regular basis. She gave me a long look. Make sure you treat him right. Michael's one of the good ones. Don't finish that statement. We make it a point not to lie to each other in this unit. She pulled her purse from her drawer and headed for the door. Good night. Night. I remained alone in the squad room, knowing I should leave and unable to make myself go. A million questions went through my mind. Would Siegfried confess to everything now that we had him? Did it even matter? We had him for attempted murder of police officers, and given the number of security cameras near that bar, we'd be able to pin the explosive device on him too. Rollins wouldn't be able to deny either of those things, not when Riley and I would testify against his client. A phone rang in the distance, getting louder and closer. Riley emerged from the stairwell, glancing at his phone and then at me. He hit answer and held it to his ear. Hey, I'm gonna have to call you back. Then he put it into his pocket. I rushed into his arms and hugged him. Are you okay? I'm fine. He didn't sound fine. Are you? I am now. Good answer. He scratched his head and edged toward his desk, glancing at the security camera and reminding me we weren't truly alone. I got my ass handed to me, but they cleared me. He pulled out a notepad and started writing in the dim light. At least we got Siegfried. It took us long enough. Let's just hope he doesn't have another escape plan. Don't even say that. I watched him write his report. He was stressed. I could see it in the way his shoulders tensed and the white-knuckled grip he had on the pen. When he finished, he threw the pen down and let out a frustrated growl. Hey, I said softly, pushing away from my desk and crossing to him. You're okay. Everyone made it out of the bar okay. That's all that matters. It's not that. You should have waited for backup. You should have waited for me before you went inside that furniture store. There wasn't time. I know, but you scared me today, just like that day with Striker King. I don't want to lose you. You won't. I glanced at the cameras, aware they didn't record audio. But maybe don't shoot the next person who assaults me. He came at you with a deadly weapon, and then he knocked a bookcase on top of you. You could have been killed or paralyzed. I needed to end it before things got worse. He had a hidden stash of guns, I said, unsure if Riley had heard the news. His eyes went wide. That's why I got cleared so quickly. Uh-huh, but you didn't know. Still, it was the right call. He stared into my eyes. And I won't apologize for that. If someone hurts you, so help them. In that case, we probably shouldn't work together. Maybe not. He moved closer. Now that this is over, you can do whatever you want. It's your call, Lex. You decide. Whatever I want? Yep. What I want is to go back to your place and finish what we started in your kitchen. The sauce? Uh-huh. His blue eyes ignited. Get going. I'll be right behind you. We barely made it inside his apartment before his mouth was on mine. He kissed me hard, needing to feel grounded after the day we had. Michael. My voice was barely a whisper as he kissed down the column of my neck and his fingers undid the buttons on my shirt, but I had no intention of stopping him. He pulled my tucked-in shirt free from my pants and smiled at the front clasp on my bra as he unhooked it, watching the material fall to the sides. I threw my head back as his mouth explored my newly exposed flesh. When his lips moved back to mine, my hands made fast work of his shirt, rubbing random patterns against his abdomen. His skin scorched my fingertips. He ran his hand along my stomach before undoing my belt. I quivered, and my legs shook as I stepped out of my pants. He smiled at the effect he was having on me. Lexie. He met my eyes, and I saw just how badly he needed this. Please. Condoms? He lifted me up, my legs wrapping around his waist as he walked us into the bedroom and dropped me onto the bed. Good thing I bought a box the other day. Did you think you'd get lucky? Never this lucky. 41. I stretched out in Riley's warm bed, watching as he entwined his fingers with mine. I didn't think it was possible, but you definitely outdid yourself. I warned you what happens to the male anatomy when things get dicey at work. He pressed my hand to his lips. So what happens now?
I guess I call Amber and tell her I have a boyfriend.
Oh wow, that makes it official and everything. We should post it online. He snorted, enjoying the mockery.
Sure, except neither of us uses social media and we've agreed that no one at work needs to know about us. Not until I figure out what I want to do.
No problem, but Kemper better keep his distance and he better be nicer to you.
And you better be a little less alpha male. I'm capable of taking care of myself and fighting my own battles.
I wouldn't have it any other way,
he replied, finding the phrase amusing given the context.
How do you feel about constant sleepovers? With the way work is, the only chance we'll have to see each other will be at night, and you know how often we get late-night calls.
Toothbrushes, deodorant, body wash. I listed the toiletries I'd need to buy. Do you have conditioner?
Why?
He ran his free hand through his hair.
Does my hair seem dry or unmanageable?
No, you have great hair.
It's because I condition.
He rolled onto his side.
I'm exhausted. We'll work on the shopping list tomorrow.
He watched as I tugged on his t-shirt and settled back on the bed beside him.
Oddly enough, I'm guessing you'll have fewer things to keep at my place. After all, you can sleep in my clothes, but I can't say the same.
I inhaled sharply. The familiar unease of a new relationship washed over me, but this time I forced it away. This relationship was different. I was different, and Michael Riley was unlike any man I'd ever met.
Is everything okay, Lex? You got quiet all of a sudden. Am I boring you?
No, I'm good. I smiled. We're good. This has been Burglary Blues, written by G.K. Parks and Elisa Archer. Narrated by Harlow Wilde. Copyright 2015-2023 by Elisa Archer and G.K. Parks. Production copyright by G.K. Parks.